Thank you all for coming. Great turnout. As a representative of Triple E, just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for Liba and Tax participation in making this event happen. Thanks for the Texas Sports Media Department for helping set up the room. And thanks, of course, to Joel and Gerardo for showing up and making it happen. Okay. All right, guys, good seeing you here. Thanks for coming out. I know it's a tough week and we're all getting ready for spring break, so thanks for that. I'm Nasser Mohammed, the president of the Latin Economics and Business Association. And first off, I'd like to thank Professor Joel and Gerardo for coming out. He came out from Mexico City to speak with us. We're very happy to have you here, and it's an honor. And well, that's it. Just thanks for coming out. And if you're a LIBA member or any member, just please sign in the attendance sheet and have a great day after this. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I guess we'll start out with a very important question. Gerardo Casanova. Was your name, was that a good or bad thing when you were dating when you were younger?
Well, my girlfriend is back there, so she can answer that.
She's a very brave woman, obviously. So I think it would be helpful for everyone here, because a number of people here are interested in the sports business, kind of go through your career path and how you got where you are today, and then describe, please, for us what you do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jorge, for the invitation. I love Austin, so for me coming here was very, very easy in terms of making me come to UT Austin, which I used to come here very, very often for other reasons. But my career at ESPN is kind of strange because I, of course, come from academics. I did a PhD in economics, and my career was going through becoming a professor. Mm-hmm. That was my whole whole goal. After a year as a professor in econometrics, mm-hmm. I decided to go to media, which is something I was very passionate about. So for those of you who are from Mexico, I worked for 3 years on special projects for Grupo Televisa, that owns Univision here in the U.S., as the head of international. And while I was in international, I met my current boss, who is the head of ESPN International.
Russell Wolf?
Yeah, uh-huh. Russell. Yeah. And I was very, very persistent with Russell that the ESPN presence in Latin America was a disaster. No? We basically were a brand that had a network from Bristol in Connecticut that would go through the entire region of Latin America. And it was just a duplication of what we had in the US. Right. It was one network that went through the whole territory. So I insisted to him for 3 or 4 years that they needed to establish a business in the region. So I think out of persistence, and Russell don't want me to see anymore in New York, he finally agreed. Mm-hmm. And we opened our first operations in Buenos Aires. The reason being that production in Buenos Aires is very cheap and very good quality. So it's inexpensive and very, very creative, very high quality. So we started with a network there. Then we opened our operations in Mexico, and we divided. We increased the number of networks, so we went from one network that went through the region. We broke that to 3 networks, one in the southern region that went through Argentina, Uruguay, and all of the countries surrounding the Andina region. Then we opened a network in Mexico that went through, we opened 2 networks in Mexico that went from Mexico to Central America. And then we opened a small operations in Colombia that went to Venezuela and other areas around it. Each of them with a single commercial stream, so we can create an advertising business around the networks and around the negotiations we did with cable companies, which is another part of I will tell you more or less how the business is built. But since then, this was around 8 years ago, we moved from that. Right now we have 24 channels in the region. for specific countries, and 4 channels in each sub-region. No? So we have 24 regions and 4 channels in each of those 24 regions. So that is 90 something networks. 96 networks. And the way we divide the business is, of course you know this by heart, is advertising, which is an area that is basically focused on ad revenue. Affiliates, which is the whole business that negotiates rights with cable companies. Marketing and all the supporting areas. And of course, rights and productions, no? Which is the most technical part of our business in terms of producing everything that you see on the screens in those regions, and in negotiating rights for all the content we have at the networks. No?
Okay, so when ESPN in New York, I assume when they were in Bristol, have you been to Bristol much?
Yes, very much. I was there last week, actually.
Yeah, my condolences.
Yeah.
That's for those of you, Bristol. I mean, ESPN's an incredible company, but Bristol is there's nothing going on in Bristol. No. It's like I think Charlie Steiner, one of the ESPN's former announcers, his great line was, "There's nothing happier than Bristol in your rearview mirror."
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Pretty true.
I agree.
I mean, there was nothing there before ESPN started, and there's still there's ESPN.
There's an elevator company, Otis.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
See what you learn out here today.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That's the only 2 things in Bristol.
So after football, football, what's the most important sport for your territories?
Well, it's a very good question because every single country has its own preference, and this was one of the first challenge we had. The way that the U.S. Headquarters manage Latin America. For those of you who are Hispanic will understand this, but they treated the Hispanic market as if it was one country and not different nations. And culturally, Mexican culture is absolutely different from Argentinian culture. I would say that Mexican culture in terms of sports is more similar to the US than what it is to Argentina. The only thing we have in common is the language.
Right.
But in Argentina, our rights go around rugby, polo, and of course football, soccer. But you have very niche and very powerful content on those specific areas. If you go to Venezuela, it's baseball.
Right.
If you go to Mexico, you have boxing, but also American sports such as NFL and NBA and so on. In Colombia, you have cycling. But again, this is a differentiation that we had to understand from the very beginning, and it was a huge effort to get our organization to understand it, because you have to go for rights that are relevant to each market. So our goal was to localize ESPN as much as possible in different countries and make it a local brand. No? So like a Coca-Cola in each of these countries feels local, no? Even though it's a US-based company.
Yeah.
It was the same for ESPN, but even more a challenge because we were a network. So what we did is we would get these very relevant rights for each of these territories and then surround that right with the most important announcers in that region to make it legitimate. So for example, in Mexico, we would get the rights for local soccer, which was a huge challenge due to monopolies and how the market works. But we will pair those rights with the most important talent in the market, the most credible talent, to make it as local as possible. No? So we have achieved that in Mexico, we have achieved that in many countries, and we're trying to go to the second level of regionalization right now. In smaller but very rich countries like Chile, like Peru, like Costa Rica, et cetera, no? It's a huge undertaking. You know?
Yeah, I know it's hard to generalize, but who are your, ESPN is by far the biggest brand in sports in this country. But when you're talking Mexico or Argentina,
yeah.
Brazil, it's a different story. Who are your big competitors there, and how do you try to kind of dent their market share a little bit?
Well, that's also a huge learning process that we had to do, because we're not the huge, all-powerful country in any of these markets. So usually you have monopolies in the different countries of Latin America. You have Globo in Brazil, you have Clarín in Argentina, you have Venevisión in Venezuela, or Televisa in Mexico. And these are really, really huge corporations that not only are competitors, but are distributors. So they own the cable systems. So you have to kind of compete, but also create a balance for them to distribute your network in their platforms. So it's a very, very tough day-to-day going back and forth. So you go into the market and try to grow as much as possible without triggering these monopolies to kick you out of the market, basically. Which I hope this is not being taped, but that's basically what they do. No, they bully you to kick you out. So one of the reasons my title is Disney and ESPN is because of that. So what Disney did is Disney is a completely different strategy for ESPN. Disney doesn't allow anybody to touch their content.
Right.
So the content comes from Burbank or from whatever they're producing, and they just give it to us for us to distribute and make business out of it. But it's untouchable, no?
And for everyone who doesn't know, Disney owns 80% of ESPN.
Yeah, yes. So Disney, having the Disney name and the Disney channels with us is a great way to have negotiation power with the cable operator. So it's different that, hey, we come here with 4 networks in one particular country to 8 or 10 networks in each particular country. So our negotiating position is totally changed from that, no? But again, each competitor is different in each market. In Argentina and Mexico in particular, they are very aggressive, and trying to get an inch of their market is a huge undertaking, but also a great reward, no? Because every dollar you get from those markets is huge, versus other countries where you don't have that type of resistance.
Right.
But it's also not a very interesting market, no? So it's a very tough balance that you have to capture, and of course create relationships with these people in order to let you go into those niches. But we have really done a great effort with the US guys to make them understand and how to compete in these markets when you're not the leader, no? Here sometimes you can get complacent because being so big, no?
How does Disney's, or ESPN's rather, their penetration into Latin America compare to the way they're penetrating into Europe or Asia or some other markets?
Well, actually, ESPN Latin America currently is probably 90% of the international business.
Is it?
We used to have a big business in Asia, which we sold to Fox.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Star, right.
Interestingly enough. Europe proved to be incredibly enough too monopolistic. So ESPN did a huge bid for Liga Premier rights. We won, and after 3 years we had to renegotiate that, and the package was worth $2 billion. And we decided, for reference, the first package was around $200 million. So we went from 200 million to 2 billion in less than 3 years. Wow. And we decided to just take our losses and get out of the market, no? We stayed in those markets with a digital play. So we have Cricinfo and others with cricket and other platforms. But in Europe and in Asia and Africa, we basically have a digital business. And Australia also.
Interesting.
In the only place we have networks where our business model is very similar to the US business model is in Latin America.
So how do the American sports, the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball, and how do those sports do in some of your territories?
In the NFL in Mexico is more commercially successful than local soccer. It's huge. Wow. It's the biggest sporting property to market because of the sponsors it has within it. So even though local soccer is much more relevant, you have local brands. supporting those teams. So commercially, it's good for the local networks and so on. But for us, that we go for bigger brands like a Pepsi or a Coke or I don't know, some of the marquee marketing brands, NFL is much more interesting. And that's about it. The NFL, really to the South, they're relevant in Brazil, but in other countries it's really insignificant, no? The NBA is huge in North Latin America, so I'm talking from Venezuela, including Venezuela to the north. And in Argentina it became relevant with Ginobili and San Antonio and so on, but it's getting there. In South, the American sports that are more relevant is tennis, of course. And the sports that is right now up and coming, which is to us has been a huge surprise, is Formula One. Because of course the Latin American pilots you get from Brazil, from Colombia, and from Mexico.
Drivers?
Yeah. It's drivers here. And a huge investment by local brands. So you have Telmex in Mexico, Claro in the whole region. So Formula One is becoming a popular sport. No? Baseball is relevant in Venezuela and in all of those Caribbean regions. Caribbean is a big business for us, surprisingly, especially because of the cruises. So we charge by cabin, and that's a very interesting business.
That is interesting.
Very, very niche, but it's a big business.
Well, you spend a lot of time in your cabin after you get food poisoning.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. Exactly. We don't buy rights for those markets, but it's just like gravy for us.
So, I mean, how do the rights work when you're in a boat, you know, and going to different places? That'd be kind of complicated.
Yes, especially because the boats come from Greece or from...
Right, they're under some flag in Belgium or Luxembourg or one of those kind of Liechtenstein, one of those places.
It's a gray line.
Yeah.
So we sell them where they navigate and apparently where the port they're at. But it's really just a flat fee because they sub-report anything they want.
Right.
You know, really. So you just kind of building a flat fee more and calculating more or less how many rooms they have per certain area of the sea, you know? And depending on the territory that they usually navigate to. It's not a very complex, but an interesting formula we have that for them, and it works out. It works out.
So describe a little bit of the economics. Obviously, ESPN in this country, for those of you who don't know, is by far the most profitable network. Gerardo told me it's over 60% of Disney's earnings are Disney's profits, I guess, are from ESPN, and with only 35% of the revenue, so you can see it's a very profitable business. But and to give you some sense, in this country, Disney, ESPN, rather, the channel alone makes $6 a month for every subscriber. There's 90-something million subscribers, and that's just for the main ESPN channel, and you throw in ESPN2 and ESPN News and ESPNU and everything else, and I don't know the exact number, but they probably make, $8 or $9 billion before they sell one commercial. And so that's why they can afford to pay, $1.9 billion for the NFL, and there's college football rights are over $1 billion altogether, and everything. So obviously ESPN Latin America doesn't really compare to that financially, but how do you impress upon your bosses how important it is that ESPN grows its Latin American presence, since they did not do well in, as you mentioned, in Europe or Asia?
Well, it's by our margin. Even though our revenue is not in those levels, we get very interesting profits. So it's a very healthy business. Besides having dictators in Venezuela or inflations in some of other areas, it's actually a very largely growing business all over. So that's interesting for them. The other part is that ESPN is not struggling. It's doing amazingly well in the U.S., but it's seeing the future, and cable subscription in the U.S. is, of course, going down. So every person that doesn't connect to cable, especially young people, is $1 or $6 loss to ESPN.
Every month, yeah.
Every month. And you have 3% decrease of cable subscription this year, which is huge. It's my whole budget maybe, or more, no? So Latin America, it's a great opportunity, and they see it as a great opportunity for the future. No, they see that their presence in the U.S. distribution is basically 100%. So Latin America is still in the 60% range with a lot of room for growth. So
when you say 60%, are you talking about
penetration?
Cable penetration?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the percentage of total homes that get subscribed to some sort of pay television.
Exactly. So there's a huge opportunity there. And we're getting that opportunity. We're growing double digits in terms of penetration year by year. So it still has to become a mature business. We're not a mature business. So in that sense, the U.S. Our U.S. headquarters is extremely interested in that. That's one part. The other side is that you have Hispanics, of course, here in the U.S., which is a huge market. And I can say this with confidence that very few companies in the U.S. understand that market. Even though everybody wants it, very few companies really, really understand it. And the only company that has understood that market and has really gained from it is Univision. And the reason why Univision has been so successful is because probably 85% of its content comes from Mexico. So the way Univision does this is they target the U.S. Hispanic Mexican market instead of going through 20 nationalities.
Right.
No? And ESPN Latin America, in that sense, is now controlling 90% of the content that ESPN is delivering for the U.S. Hispanic market. And that's going to become much more. Because all of the Mexican talent that we have is extremely, extremely relevant here. For first, second, and third generation Hispanics, or Mexicans,
right.
Which is again around 60-65% of the U.S. Hispanic market. So ESPN understands this now and understands that it has to target that market, and they're getting a lot of that content from Latin America. Also, the Latin America operation really understands how to deal with rights negotiation in the region. So, as we were just talking, negotiating rights here in the States is completely different from international rights, which is you deal with FIFA, you deal with Formula One, you deal with the International Olympic Committee, and it's not like you do tender offers. No? There's a lot behind the scenes. In the U.S., it's much more transparent in that sense.
Yes.
No? So in that way, they really leverage our understanding of that in order to acquire rights all over. So, for example, one of the big strategies that ESPN is doing right now, which is very interesting, is one of the innovation things that we're trying to do in the States. And again, this is not very public. So we're trying to see what will happen if we go directly to consumers. So for those of you that like cricket, we opened the platform to bypass the cable operator and to offer for $100 a subscription to the Cricket World Cup. It was very successful. Russell actually ran that. Uh-huh. And it was it's a very interesting experience. It was very successful. But those rights for cricket, and now we're going to do the same from rugby, were acquired through the Latin America operations, because these are operations in Latin America or in India. In India, we have a huge operation in Bangalore for our digital content. And those are markets that really understood how to negotiate those rights. So again, they see all of these operations throughout the region as a basis to make ESPN a really multicultural operation, which is not. It's still very, very white American men type of business, no?
Yeah, no question. So I think we're running a little long, but we'll finish up. We'll segue into, you were telling me about you were at the Sloan Analytics Conference, the MIT Analytics Conference. Why don't you tell everyone what you were doing there and how that applies to your job in ESPN?
Well, after trying to be an academic, I always I'm always very academically curious. So 2 years ago, I enrolled to MIT to do a program there. And MIT is in the cutting edge of sports analytics. And ESPN is a huge supporter of that. So as we were just saying, analytics usually have applied to sports for performance. So you use analytics for making a better baseball team or making a better football team or calculating the probabilities through certain linear regressions, I guess, of why a team must win or should win, and so on. What I'm trying to do at MIT is to apply those analytics to the business side of this operation. So we're applying analytics to understand how much rights should cost, and if it makes a good business, if it makes sense business-wise to acquire certain rights in each territory. So mapping these 96 networks and all of these operations that we have with analytics in order to make smarter decisions, or at least have bases when we make stupid decisions also, no? And see where, because sometimes you make decisions that really don't make sense in this business. Sometimes you just buy certain rights that you have no idea how they're going to do. And if you, instead of having no idea, having a 15% idea of how it's going to behave, it's an improvement, no? And sometimes that improvement is huge. So we're trying to do that, and MIT is in the cutting edge of that, and everything that has to do with the analytics behind sports. And ESPN we bought Nate Silver's website. You probably know it, the 538, which is an analytics tool. It's used for politics and other things, but we're now, it's in-house. We bought that business in order to get into that sector, of course, and also make interesting content around analytics, which we feel is going to, we're trying to open an analytical, they call it a database journalistic approach to sports or something like that. So I really encourage you to check out that site and read those articles, because I think is where the analysis of sports is going to go someday, and this is why we bought this business.
Right. No, it's an interesting business, and for those of you who don't know much about Nate Silver, he basically predicted through analytics, the last number of elections with remarkable accuracy. And so, what ESPN did was buy his business and try to transfer his analytical skill from politics and predicting election results to sports and predicting the outcome of various games and stuff. Yeah. But anyway, I think that's it. I just want I want to thank everybody for coming. We're incredibly fortunate to have someone of Gerardo's caliber here, and it's important that when someone, again, of his prominence shows up, that we give him some support. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any questions or
anything? I'm sorry, yeah. If there are any questions, that would be great.
Sure.
So how is ESPN getting ready for the shift from regular TV or cable TV to TV on demand?
Well, again, we did this experiment with cricket, and we did it with cricket because we wanted to do something under the radar, very specific, because of course if we go directly to consumers, we will get phone calls from every cable operator out there, no? So we did this more as an experiment because our business depends on the cable operator. So that's one of the ways we're looking at it. It's basically a digital approach to this. We feel that digital is going to be huge, and we are preparing for it. So there's a huge amount of investment on our digital platforms. And the rollout of this service, of the player that we did for the Cricket World Cup, is like the first seed that we have planted in order to explore that market. I think we're a little bit far away from going there, but it was definitely a very good experiment. The results were exactly what we wanted. And it's huge for us because we have now gained the knowledge to go directly to consumer. And directly to consumer means attacking these people that are the cable cutters, as they call them, no? So that's one of the strategies. The other thing is we have really bought every single rights that is mostly relevant in the state. So that's not like the best way to go out to consumers, but we have secure content in order to anticipate any form of new technology that comes out there, and that it would allow us to exploit that platform through our content. No? So the idea is to become as agnostic to technology as possible, but that really depends on that. We have a few deals with YouTube and are very cautious of Google and all of these companies because they take our money away in terms of advertising. No? But we're very, very careful about this, and we are buying business that we don't understand, like the 538, we bought Grandland, which is another digital player. We're buying a few in Latin America, and we're developing a few ourselves in order to prepare for this. But hopefully it lasts for a little bit more. Yeah.
I was wondering, in a nutshell, maybe how different is it for you to acquire rights in America, and how is it in Latin America? Or just by sport, is it very different, or is it? How does it work?
It's completely different. It's a process. The last negotiation I did, which was very important, was for a first division soccer club in Mexico, and to make our U.S. colleagues understand the mechanics of that negotiation was really, really hard to do. That was part of the process, because as opposed to here where you go to the NFL, for example, and you just put a check and either you win or you don't, and you win a league, you win a package or a bundle of games. In Latin America, in this case, the case specific for Mexico, but it's almost the same everywhere, you buy per team. So we bought the rights for one team out of 18. And the problem is that team is doing very bad right now. So we paid a lot of money for that team. The negotiation is so kind of intangible. It's just like we're worth $10 million a year for this team. Why?
You just get their home games, you get both their home and away?
Only their home games. But again, the value is like, well, that's what it's worth, no? And by the way, if not, we have a monopoly here that is paying that. So first you go into the bullying of the monopoly, saying if you buy those rights, we will cut you off cable. So that's one piece of it. But after you decide to kind of risk it and say, I'm going to go for the rights, we went for the rights and got the rights. But it's like putting all of your money in one basket, because again, the team is doing very poorly. And right now we're like hoping that the team, part of the company is saying, I hope they get relegated to second division, because that way we don't pay anymore. and the other part of the company is like, come on, we need to write this out and see what happens. No? But it's very risky in that sense. That's from a local standpoint. From international, it's almost the same. So we, again, in Latin America, we bought the rights for the Olympics. And the dynamics of that negotiation versus NBC here in the States is completely different. Because, again, of the players you have in each market. No? When you go, again, to Globo in Brazil, they are the all-powerful, which is monopoly, which is something that in the US you usually don't have. You probably have 2 or 3 or 4 companies. But in these regions you have one dominant company, and it's a whole different dynamic because of that. Yeah, up there.
I think that y'all are doing great as far as generating a lot of revenue, but are there any current marketing strategies that you have in place to attract more of the female consumer? Because obviously a lot of your advertising dollars, you're missing out on a huge pool.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering what kind of marketing strategies you have in place to attract more female viewers.
There's a woman at ESPN, she's amazing. Her name is Laura Gentile, and Laura runs ESPNW, which their whole business This is a big group of very smart people trying to create content to make strategies for women. They are based in New York, and that department is, so it's like a lobbying department within ESPN for women in order to make that balance, no? They're doing amazing. They're saying things like 30 for 30, but focused on women, documentaries and all that type of content, which is something ESPN has always been a little bit reluctant to do, but they're doing that. College sports, they're doing a lot of that with women. They are opening a few digital strategies on that. I think ESPNW is already online, and they're trying to grow that business. But there's a huge amount of people around that strategy. In Latin America, it's very tough because the market is very different from here. And I don't want to get into the sensibilities or in political incorrectness of how probably what's the scope of women in one country or another. They're just different. So to make like a paintbrush strategy around Latin America, it's very tough. In our case, specifically in Argentina, for example, women are great athletes. You have field hockey. We do a lot of that in Argentina, and are really focused on that. In Mexico, we have a huge challenge because really there's not many sports where women stand out. And again, I don't know if it's because of the culture or the way it evolved. It must be some anthropological reason why that happened. So we're trying to figure it out, really.
My question was more based on like what are the current strategies in place to get women to watch more of the games that you have rights to, like how to get more women interested in March Madness, how to get more women interested in the NFL.
Yeah. Well, again, I can tell you from the Latin. I know Laura is also focusing on that, by the way. So this department, they built this department to go through the entire business in seeing what they were doing in every single area of the business and put that line of attention to it. In the case of us in Latin America, so for example, we are acquiring a lot of talent, female talent, to be on our screens. We have a whole week of women announcing sports that is called La Semana de la Mujer, and it's around engaging them in this part. What we don't do, and this is the difference in Latin America, this is why I want to be very subtle. So for example, if you watch Televisa and you watch the women that are announcing in Televisa to encourage sports, how I describe it is women, it's the sort of anchors of women that I think women hate. In the sense that it's the hot, sexy, beautiful, that they're selling for men, not for women. So they position these anchors as for the men viewers, even though they play it as a woman's play, which I don't think it is at all. So what we try to do is get female anchors to talk about sports in a knowledgeable, interesting, smart way. And that's basically what we're doing in terms of making that happen. In terms of marketing per se, like a marketing campaign, we just market that, but there's not like a specific campaign that we're running on that, no? But I'm proud to say that in Mexico, in Argentina, and in Colombia, the ratio of women to men anchors is really balanced, as opposed to the States, which is much more men-oriented, because of course it's the business here, no?
Yeah, I got a quick question. You mentioned that Univision, it's one of the very few businesses that knows how to tap into the Hispanic market, and we're talking here about like 30% of the U.S. population, like
yeah,
I don't know,
it's gonna be bigger.
Latin people.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest issues on Apart from the obvious, it's all these different cultures and.
Well, I mean, I know almost every executive in the U.S. from the media point of view that is targeting Hispanics. And again, the usual perception that I get is that they think Hispanics is a nationality. Really, it's like a country. Like the Hispanic country, or I don't know. But it's like that, no? It's amazing that when you get, they don't even go a layer beneath that to understand that it's much more complex than that. And I think what Univision, and again, you go to Telemundo and you see this. So, for example, you go to Telemundo, you watch a novela, and you have 10 nationalities in the novela, which is irrelevant to. So you have an actor from Chile, another from Mexico, another from Venezuela, and it's like it's nothing for anybody. And this is why they don't do well. And when you speak to the executives there, they're not even interested. It's like a secondary thing to them. Univision is different because Univision is very peculiar. It was started by Televisa, and then sold to Jerry Perenchio, who is as American as you can get. He didn't speak Spanish. He didn't understand the market, but he understood that the market was Mexican. The huge amount of that market. So he basically just opened the networks and had Mexican content run through that. And it's basically all the Televisa content. And that proved to be right. No, it proved that that is a market that it's really if you want to target, hey, I love people from El Salvador, but how many people, what's the size of that market? It's very, very small. So you have to go for target something and go for it with everything you got. No? And I think that's why Univision has done a very, 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 very good job in doing that. And I think there's very few companies that have understood that simple fact. We struggle with that internally all the time. When I came to ESPN and I saw the US packing operation, it was the United Nations. No? It was nothing to anybody. So I think that's the reason that you have that situation.
And the irony is Gerardo said, is both Univision and Telemundo are owned by Anglos, right? Telemundo was owned by Comcast, and Univision was this guy Jerry Perenchio, and then private equity bought it, and I think they're actually doing an IPO, but it's owned by Anglos, and that may be a large part of the problem. I mean, I think that the Hispanic and Mexican market is obviously getting much bigger in this country. I know we were talking about the World Cup earlier, and for the next 3 World Cups, Fox has the English language rights and Telemundo has the Spanish language rights, and it's the only sports event in this country where they sell those rights separately, but Telemundo is actually paying more than Fox for those rights by a lot. So that's why, and so I think people in this country are starting to obviously catch on that again, Anglos tend to think that the Hispanic market is a monolith when it's a million different things, and then they just can't focus. But I think this country is starting to catch on that it's a huge and fastest growing market here, and putting some real money and some effort into it.
Yes. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, what percentage of ESPN's profits come from the online market, and how does the rights or getting into new regions from online markets different from other kinds of markets such as digital markets?
Do you mean how the rights are divided now that you have digital platform?
Once you buy the rights, you can use them for all your online markets and.
Yeah, they're getting much more complex. So in terms of revenue, ESPN more or less like 60 to 70% of the revenues comes from affiliates. So that's cable subscription. The 30% more or less is advertising. Of that 30%. Of that 100% of advertising, which is that 30%, you have around 10% that today comes from digital. So it's still very, very small. Google basically dominates that part. No? but we're trying to, it's a growing business for us in Latin America and in the US. In terms of the rights, it's extremely expensive now to buy rights and to be exclusive. So for example, in Latin America, we forgo, how do you say that? Forgo. We forwent all of the exclusivity we had. So 5 years ago, we were exclusive in Spanish League, English Premier League, what have you, this NFL, etc., etc. Now they sell by language, by platform, by medium, by seconds. It's extremely, now they sell this through pieces, no? So we made a decision at what point we cannot keep everything exclusive because it's just economically impossible, no? So right now we choose our battles, and sometimes we battle the fight of getting full rights to every single median outlet. So for example, the Olympics, we have full rights. We share those rights with other companies, but in digital we have certain rights exclusive for us, and we chose what was our main objective there. And then you have highlight rights, but highlight rights for our networks and then for our digital platforms. So you can really divide it in many, many different ways, in languages. So it's getting very, very specific to all of this. The big challenge is that you have companies which are like formal companies that don't go through the process that we go through, and that they just really steal the highlights of content. And it's a huge challenge for us. So you probably go to YouTube and you watch the play that just happened, and they cannot do that. Or any other mobile platform, for example, no? So that's the huge challenge, and it's impossible to regulate or go after each and every one of these outlets, no? So it's very, very challenging. There's a huge army of lawyers in the company trying to resolve that.
All right, I guess everyone's ready for a drink, I suppose.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. It was thank you.